40% of these, okay, this meeting's being recorded. About 40% of the addresses are lost to standards. So, you know, certain, that's this gray areas on the right-hand side, multicast and reserved, and some other small areas. Like you can't use an address that starts with 0. You can't use ones that are reserved for certain RFCs that existed a long time ago that aren't really relevant anymore. So we only have about 2.4 billion left out of the 4 billion. And about 10% are given to big companies. If you look in the top left, there's HP, DEC, MIT, GE, IBM, the USPS. They have huge chunks of addresses that were given in the 90s that we can't really take back. And so it's kind of legacy. And so we're really left with about 2 billion. And the Earth's population is about 7.5 billion. And there's about 11.8 billion phones, laptops, computers, and cell phones. So, you know, we really need about 20 to, I don't know, 50 billion addresses if we want to connect the whole world. And we actually ran out of IP addresses in around 2009. So if we ran out, how is the internet still working? Well, it's still working by everyone kind of being careful, not over assigning, and doing something called a private network or NAT. And many ISPs do this, including us. We're not an ISP, but we also do it, I mean. Cell phone providers do this, public Wi-Fi does this, cable companies do this, where you have tons of laptops and cell phones and all kinds of computers behind this giant network, and they all trickle down to one address on the far right side in this picture, for example. And so you can multiplex a few thousand people behind one address. So rather than needing a couple thousand addresses, you only really need one. And so that's kind of what's kept most of the internet working for the last 20 years or so. But this is getting pretty long in the tooth, and it's actually not that easy to do efficiently. And it breaks things like Skype and Zoom. So IPv6 is this new protocol. Engineers actually saw this problem coming in the early 90s. They said to themselves, this isn't going to work forever. What happens when there's 4 billion devices? A new standard was developed in around 1995. And there were some experiments for about 10 years, but it didn't really go anywhere. But around 2010, things started to get deployed, and IPv6 became sort of a real thing. Maybe a little bit earlier. These are just fuzzy timelines. Some of the benefits, V6 is much larger. Rather than only 4 billion addresses, there's 340 billion addresses, which is quite a bit. And so we're probably not going to run out anytime soon. It's more than the number of molecules on the Earth, so we're fine. It also fixes a number of problems that were really a challenge in IPv4, namely packet fragmentation, DHCP, address discovery, multicast, IPsec, all these other things. And so it improves the way computers communicate quite a bit. I'll just stop there for a second. Does anyone have a question? I see in the chat that somebody might have a question.
Olivia kept raising his hand.
Yeah, it's me. Sorry, I was trying to find out the unmute button. Does the DHCP mechanism been invented as well to circumvent the number of IPs on IPv4?
No, DHCP just is a way to assign addresses easily and automatically.
Has nothing to do with the number of them.
Not really, no. I mean, it allows for address reuse, but it's not a way to limit the number of addresses that get handed out. Although it's usually used in conjunction with NAT and private networks. So they go hand in hand.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this is IPv6. It's bigger and better. And it's also different. So yeah. So how will it help NYC Mesh if we get IPv6? Well, we use NAT just like many other organizations. We have many people, maybe 1,000 or so, behind a few IP addresses. It's a bit slow to do NAT. It's kind of actually CPU heavy on the routers to do it. It's annoying to do it because it's confusing. It's sometimes difficult to do right. And depending on the direction you're going, you might not be able to come back in a different path from the internet. So yeah, we have to take care when using it. We will run out of private addresses. That's the addresses that you can use behind a NAT. We will run out of these addresses around 8,000 nodes. Now we only have maybe 500 and something active, but we've already allocated up to our 5,000th node. And so if we go beyond maybe 8,000, or there's a star, you know, it's around 8,000, it's a little bit higher, but if we go above, say, 8,000 nodes, we're going to start to have this challenge where we can't really sustain a good network. It's also easier to understand IPv6 addresses. It sounds a little bit crazy because they have these long numbers, but when we begin in a minute, I'll show you that on a mesh network, it actually could be quite easy to debug and use. Our routing protocols actually work better with IPv6. We have a number of kind of hacks that we've put on our network to try and make things work the right way, but with v6, you don't need some of those hacks, and it will modernize our infrastructure. So there's some benefits to the mesh for it. For example, an IPv6 address looks like this. It has these 8 sections of hexadecimal numbers. And if we get allocated this 20010 DB8, we have the next 2 sections we can fill in. And so we could say for node 1, 2, 3, 4, we list the node number directly in the address. And so now you can see trace route, you can see when people are hopping node to node, you can see what node connects to the other node, rather than having this abstract number that doesn't really have any information in it. And then the next section would be something like the 44th apartment. Now, I don't mean apartment number 44, I just mean the 44th thing to plug into the node. And these are assigned randomly, also using a DHCP type method. And then you can have as many devices in your home as you want, 4 billion devices inside of your apartment. And so, so how many, you know, to illustrate it physically with how many nodes we can support, with IPv4, we can support about 8,000 nodes total. With IPv6, we can start with 500,000 nodes. We don't have to worry about our allocation or changing anything until we hit maybe 500,000 nodes. We can actually go up to 4 to 8 billion without any problems. We just have to request a larger allocation. So it's very easy for us to be able to get to be a super huge network without having to replan the entire network every couple of years. Another consideration is right now, we can only really have about 64 devices per node at 8,000 nodes. And what this means is, well, I say device because an apartment usually has a router and it does NAT inside the home. But if there's somebody does like their cell phone connects to the public Wi-Fi, that's considered as a device. So all of our nodes right now can't really have more than about 64 things connected to them. In IPv6, we can have in every building, we can have 4,000 apartments, and every apartment, and that's at 500,000 buildings, and every building apartment can have as many devices as you want. So the scale is that we can really achieve a few million apartments with as many IoT devices and cell phones and anything that you want inside. And we won't run out of addresses in that sense. As a point to note, there's only about 1 million buildings in New York City. So unless we really cover, unless we really practically cover half the city, we will sufficiently never run out of addresses. So this is kind of a good thing for us. So how do we do it if we want to do it? IPv6 is a little bit more rigid with the allocation style. So we actually need an official block of addresses from an organization. The organization that's part of, that we're in is ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers. It handles North America and Latin America. And so there's a cost to this. There's a one-time fee of $1,300, and there's a recurring fee every year of $1,000. So this is actually something that all organizations already pay, including us. We pay $500 a year right now, or really, I pay $500 a year right now for us to ARIN for our current addresses. And this is not a huge cost. This is just part of running a network that's on the internet. So that's the cost proposal part of it. There's some risks. So here's the slide that no one wants to see, and we will never show again. No, just kidding. We have to think about a couple of problems we might encounter, or something we have to at least know about IPv6. Firstly, we need to keep paying this $1,000 a year every year, or we lose the addresses. We don't really lose them because it's very hard to reassign them. We probably just have to pay it sometime. But even if our organization becomes super small, say, we drop down to a 20-person organization, that 20-person organization still has to pay the $1,000 per year. And if we grow really large, then the cost is, 1 penny or 10 cents per node to handle this. So it's really a trivial cost to the organization. But probably this $1,000 should come from our first $1,000, right? Because that's what allows us to run the network in the future. The next risk is that IPv6 addresses are all public. So what this means is, you notice in the example, I encoded the node number into the address. That's going to happen somehow on an IPv6 address. It doesn't expose your apartment number or who you are specifically, but the addresses that you use to connect to services on the internet will have the node number in the address. And so IPv6, this is the thing that everyone knows around the world, is that IPv6 is less anonymized than IPv4. So, so we have to maybe consider that as a risk. I'm not really sure it's a huge risk because, this should be a network for people who are needing to use the network and want to use the network, not who are doing bad things. So there's not much to hide, but it's something we should probably think about because we do have privacy concerned people. And lastly, with IPv6, we will require BGP to connect to the internet with IPv6. You cannot exit our IP addresses or any other person's IP addresses that are assigned to them through something like Time Warner, Link NYC, or something else. And so the reason this is a risk is that if we lose all of our supernodes, it will be not possible to connect to the internet with IPv6. And so if we begin to use that more and more and depend on it, it'll be a bigger challenge. So we have to make sure we maintain at least some supernode when we have IPv6. There's some caveats to these. All of them are a little bit flexible, but but making them flexible carries a lot of challenges with it, and it's very hard and expensive. So the proposal I give to the group is that we move forward with an IPv6 allocation. It's $1,300 plus $1,000 a year. We continue to support v4 as long as possible, in addition to v6. We begin including IPv6 in all of our training to get everyone up to speed, and we make it a real thing. We begin numbering buildings as nodes, not apartments. This is key because I know we've all kind of had our opinions about this, and it's a long-standing argument, but with 4,000 apartments per node allowed on IPv6, if we hand out a node number to every apartment, we're going to have 4,000 rooms in every apartment, and that's just impractical. So we don't need to do that. There's no risk if we don't change over immediately, but our long-term goal should be that. And then we continue to deploy both v4 and v6 until our 8,000th node. After 8,000, there'll be v6 only. And it sounds like maybe it's a bit of a big bottleneck, but even today, most cell phones are IPv6 only, or they're NAT. But for example, all of T-Mobile, most of Verizon Wireless, they're IPv6 only. And so there are special modes and mechanisms to be able to connect to old IPv4 sites from an IPv6 system. So we should deploy these also, because we're not going to hit 8,000 for a couple of years probably, or maybe next year, I don't know, but installed nodes, I mean. So we have some time before we need to really to get it in place. But we really need to set that up and expect that someday we're going to have an IPv6 only node. Okay, so any questions? Please just either use this raise hand thing, or you can just unmute yourself and ask some questions.
Hey, Zach, I had a quick question. This is Akash.
Hey, Akash.
Maybe I missed this because I joined a bit late, but where did the 8,000 number come from? Is that just the number of remaining IP addresses we have in our allocation? Yeah, so in v4, we're using private addresses. We're using the 10 dot range. And so we started somewhere in the 10 dot range. And if we allocate linearly /26 for every node, eventually we're going to run off the end. And so there's not going to be enough addresses for us to realistically, be able to continue every node in the private address space only. We can handle a little bit more than 8,000, but the closest number that makes sense is 8,000. We might be able to get to 10 or 12,000, but
it's around 8, let's say.
Got it.
It's not a huge problem at the moment because we have, you know, we only have about 500 something nodes running. However, because we've allocated sparsely, we already allocate up to, you know, 5,000 something. So, you know, we're approaching 8,000 pretty rapidly, and we're going to have to go back and fill in the gaps if we want V4. Otherwise, after some number, maybe 8,000, it's going to be, or maybe 10,000 if you want. We're not going to have enough V4 addresses to sustain it. But private addresses, I mean.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Other questions?
Hey, I have 2 questions. Thanks, this is really helpful. I was wondering if you know of other like networks or ISPs, I guess, that have made the transition, maybe of this size, just especially when considering like the longer commitment, the long-term commitment that it might incur.
Yeah, so firstly about long-term commitments and so on, we already have long-term commitments in terms of addressing and stuff like that, because you know, in order to participate on the internet, you have to have IP addresses and these AS numbers and so on. If you don't pay those fees, then the whole network collapses, and so that's a common thing. So I'm not really so worried about that part of it.
Okay.
But IPv6 actually is it's extremely common in almost all networks these days. For example, Verizon Wireless is all IPv6 and V4, mostly V6. T-Mobile has IPv6, Time Warner has IPv6.
Spectrum has
every
IPv6.
major Spectrum, yeah, Spectrum, Time Warner, whatever they're called now, they have it. Pilot has it. You know, every real ISP has it. There's a couple that don't have it to the house, like Verizon Fios doesn't have it to the house, just because their technology doesn't support it. The boxes with the fiber don't support it. So that's a problem for them to solve. But most, and like Link NYC doesn't have it, for example. But most ISPs, most people are going to get internet from. Every business carrier has it. All those kind of things. Most enterprises don't deploy it because they don't know, they don't have the knowledge and expertise in-house to be able to understand it, and it's different. But it's extremely common. Yeah, it's not a new thing. It's not a risky technology.
Okay, yeah, it was less of that, just I guess seeing comparatively as far as less the risk of the technology and more the risk of an organization. And I guess
I'll just add, sorry, I'll just add that most of our mesh competitors, or not, most of our mesh friends have it as well. All of Freifunk has IPv6. All of Giphy has IPv6.
Yeah, that's
so it's, you know, it's what you're supposed to do in the world these days. We're 10 years behind already. So.
Sure. And I guess with that, is there any? Well, I mean, I guess there is, but have you thought of, like, we've talked about longer leases for like signing on to longer leases, which is why we became a nonprofit in the first, or like 501c3 in the first place. Is there, with this, is there going to be more of an effort to ensure stability for supernodes, either the current ones we have or ones moving forward? I mean, I know that Supernode 1 has a little bit of uncertainties with the current lease, as in expired, if I'm still correct. And I'm just curious what the plan is for the next few years, like some outline.
1.5 years on our lease at Supernode 1.
Yeah, Supernode 1's been renewed a long time ago.
Not really linked to IPv6. We have to do that regardless.
Yeah, the only link to IPv6, Jillian makes a good point about making sure that the Supernode infrastructure remains somewhere, because we do need it with IPv6, because we have to have a BGP exit for IPv6 to work. So we do have to have some Supernode. It could be a virtual Supernode in the cloud, but you know, if we turned into an all VPN network for some reason, but we have to have something somewhere. Which means, I mean, the downside really is if we get some office that says, hey, here's a gigabit of internet, please, use it for good, right? Unless it's BGP internet, we can't do v6 on it. We have to do a VPN to some supernode. So it's a bit of a downside. It doesn't mean like Supernode 1, we did renew the lease. We're quite far into it. It was a 2-year lease, so it's going to end sometime next year.
It's a 3-year lease at Supernode.
It's a 3-year. Okay, even better. So it will end later. But I think we probably want to get off Supernode 1 someday, but we probably don't want to have. We probably should replace it with some other supernode, and we should probably have another one after that or before it, and then a third, fourth one. So the main risk is if our organization doesn't grow, it actually shrinks or something like that. That group still has to maintain something, otherwise it'll break.
Okay, and I think I might have one.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, sure. You go.
So if you have v6 going to a building and down into someone's apartment, can they just plug in a default TP-Link router, or do they have to configure it for v6?
It's a good question. It's a very good question. The many home routers now, almost all home routers, even the very cheap ones, support v6. And the nice thing is it doesn't do NAT. You actually do this thing called prefix delegation, and you get v6 addresses inside. And that's part of the 4,000 subnets per building. So most routers, many routers have it by default enabled so that you can just plug in, and something like Time Warner, if they hand you a v6 address, you just use it, right? But some of the older and cheaper ones don't. So I would suppose that even for our cheapest models, if we put the latest firmware on them, they probably will have it, but whether or not they turn it on by default, I don't know. I do know that most of the, like the ASUS and the Linksys ones, they have it on by default. I'm not sure about the TP-Link, but if it doesn't, it's going to be 1 or 2 clicks to turn it on. And if v4 is available, it will have v4 also. If it's not, then it will just ignore v4.
And what happens if someone's got a v4 only device that they want to connect to the TP-Link wirelessly?
Yeah, so many devices. So there's a couple ways you can connect v4 and v6 together. One is if you're on a v6 device and you want to access a v4 site, there's a thing called NAT64, which we would run at the Supernodes, and you would traverse the network. You would traverse NYC Mesh as 6, and then it would convert it to 4 at the end and handle the response. So that's for the nodes that are 8,000 or higher and are v6 only. For the opposite case, where you have a v4 device and you're on a node that's 8,000 or higher, we can run something local. The opposite is called 464 XLAT, and we can. It's actually not supported in MikroTik, but it doesn't matter because you need to convert it to. You need to convert your v4. You have like a temporary private network inside the house that's v4, and then the router in the home does that same conversion and sends it to the supernode, who converts it to v6. So, or leaves it as v6 and lets it go out. So basically what I'm saying is the router is supposed to handle that for you. I don't know any home routers that do that today, but I think that's going to be more and more common as v6 becomes more prevalent in homes. So since we don't need it until a little bit later, we're not going to hit our 8,000 real node until later. We have a couple of years for that, but that is a bigger problem, Brian. Yes, a v4 only device on a v6 network. There aren't many v4 only devices though.
You might say that, but then there's a lot of devices that don't even support Wi-Fi at 5 gigahertz.
That's true. That's true. But most of the v6 support is not a hardware thing; it's a software thing. So every version of Windows, Mac, and Linux since the last approximately 10 years are fine on v6, v6 only, in fact, and yeah.
Okay.
Almost all phones, Android's had it since the beginning. iOS works fine on it. So yeah, I think there are some challenges with v6 only network. A lot of conferences and companies have been deploying test v6 only networks. It's not perfect, but we won't have that for a couple of years. But this will give us the chance to have both on the whole network, and then we'll find all the problems with it and be able to go v6 only in a couple of years when we have the need for many thousands of nodes. It's not going to be sustainable to do it at v4 only.
Zach, when you say 8,000 nodes, do you mean 8,000 active nodes, or is that just node number 8,000?
That's a great question. Yeah, the unfortunately node number 8,000. The one challenge for this is we need to stop sparsely allocating our node numbers and go back and reuse old node numbers so that we can take up the space that was skipped. It's good to be a little bit sparse, but we've been 10x too sparse. So if we go back and start using some of our old node numbers, we can push this down the road for a couple of years. I mean, the not pushing v6 down the road, but pushing v6 only nodes down the road. So at the moment, it's node number 8,000, but I'd like us to work to change that to our 8,000th deployed node. And then we should have v6 also so that we can do all of this work ahead of time to be ready for that.
From a time perspective, how long do you think it would take us to kind of get an MVP IPv6 infrastructure running?
There's nothing stopping us right now from having v6 in our network except for the allocation, which is what we need to spend the $1,300 on. So that's the main thing that stops us. Hold on, let me do this. Yes, that's the primary problem that we have with v6 at the moment. There are other things. For example, we do need to update the firmwares and so on to support it. Not the firmware, sorry. We need to add the v6 capability to the configuration. But as I mentioned in the presentation, v6 is more strict with how it's allocated. And so we can't we have to actually hard code our v6 allocation into our configs for this to work properly. We can't really kind of discover it on the fly. And it's not something somebody should type in. So it's a bit of that's the main thing. Then configs can come. Supernodes they'll be done, it only is a few days of work on the supernodes or less, and then we're off for the races. We should then do obviously the bigger nodes so that it's possible. But because not everyone has v6 on the network, it's going to be very sparse. And you might encounter a v4 only node that's in the middle of two v6 only nodes, or v6 and v4 nodes. And so the 6 won't cross over that boundary until that node is updated. So that's one of the reasons it's important for us to do this now instead of in a few years when we really need it, because we need to convert most of the nodes to be v6 capable so that when there's a v6 only node that's attached to it, or it's 2 hops away, it can go through this node that's v6 and v4.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think that's the right way to think about it versus the opposite perspective of worrying that we're spending the money on something that will be dedicated towards a shrinking network.
Yeah.
I think the right mindset, just for the purposes of our organization, would be the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And let's say our network never grows past 1,000 nodes. That's I mean, that's not a great scenario, but let's just say it happens. This is a $1 per year from each node, right? And if there's 10 apartments, that's 10 cents per apartment. So this is not a big deal. In terms of the overall organization, it's not a big cost for us.
Well, it's a minimum of 25 people if they were giving $20 monthly donations and a supernode. So it just to make that clear that there is that added either expense or just, and not that that's bad, it's just, it is an additional requirement for it. So.
Well, the supernode, I mean, we do need a supernode, but it doesn't have to be a super node. It doesn't have to be like a freaking big node that's $1,000 a month. That's not the requirement. It just needs to be something which is BGP capable. So it could be, a VM in the cloud. I mean, that would suck, but that's possible in the scenario to have a $1 per month VM that handles the allocation. It's just the only thing I was saying about the BGP part is that it's not possible to consume the lower quality, quick and dirty internet connections with this V6 allocation.
Okay.
They have V6, but we can't put our V6 behind their V6 unless they allow us to, right?
And maybe I missed this, but so would any of our existing supernodes allow us to do this?
Yeah, all of our existing supernodes are BGP internet. So in fact, we already have V6. It's not a V6 which we can keep forever. So
yeah,
it's just a temporary one that I gave. So it's something that can be taken away at some point because it's non-permanent, right?
Yeah.
This allocation would establish NYC Mesh as an organization in Aaron, the registrar, and we would have our own organization number, our own organization tag, and our own allocation that's only for our organization. And so that would be ours as long as we paid the fee, forever.
And how big, so would we be allocating, or I guess buying the smallest block of IPv6 addresses that Aaron issues?
No, since we would be considered as an LIR, a local internet registrar, that's their nickname for ISP, because not all ISPs are ISPs. It's actually somebody who's responsible for managing addresses in an area. So that would be us. The smallest that we can get is this called a /32, which is this 4 billion subnets with 4 billion devices with an infinite amount of devices per subnet, right? So that's our 500,000 buildings allocation. Akash, you have something very loud that beeps once in a while, and it's quite
I'm
bad.
sorry. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so any last questions? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next topic. Mike, you're muted. We can't hear you if you're trying to speak. Okay, Mike gives us one moment sign.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, to deal with the also mixer every time I mute myself. I remember back in the days we used to do IPv6 with BGP. It was working, and there's just like a side test IPv6 or something like that worked. I was able to get a full score at that time, and then be able to assign an IPv6 self-assign or like BGP over to, at that time, it's Supernode 2. But then I was doing a similar test recently, and it failed. So I wonder if the config has changed since then.
Yeah. So the presentation I just gave is about how we can.
That.
It's okay. It's about how we can get an IPv6 allocation so we can deploy IPv6 the right way in our network. What we did in the past, we tried. There were two things that happened. One was we do have IPv6 now, and we were trying to do this thing where we use private IPv6 inside and public IPv6 outside, and we connect it together using something called, anyway, I don't remember, but we were trying to use this thing, and it breaks the standards. It doesn't work. And so you might get a good score one day, but the next day it's super unstable and it's not gonna work very well. And then the second thing is one of the mesh members also had an IPv6 allocation, and he was broadcasting it into the mesh. And so around the Supernode 2 area, if you exited the right direction, you could get out via his IPv6 addresses. And it was very generous of him to do so, but there's a lot of problems with having multiple IPv6 allocations in our mesh. And the number one problem is that it's super hard to manage, and you don't know what path you're going to take to the internet, and you have to do something called policy-based routing, which is not going to be something we want to deal with. It's going to be a huge problem for us. So all of this is solved if we get our own IPv6 allocation. And there's a lot of other interesting things that we can do. We can even have other people's allocations behind our allocation. And we can even give out addresses like Hurricane Electric does. We can be a tunnel broker for IPv6 addresses. There's a lot of fun things we can do that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So you shouldn't expect V6 to work right now, Mike. It's completely broken.
Well, thanks for the explanation. That's very understandable. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, if no more questions, then we'll turn it back over to Jillian, who will tell us what's next.
Cool. I think we're still on shared screen, but now Leslie's gonna talk about some of the work she's been doing on our finances, because she understands this in the way that I definitely don't. And this probably segues nicely into some of the points that we were just talking about. So Zach, I think you have to unshare your speaker. I think you're still sharing your screen. I really like this group thing though, especially for questions. Zach? Oh, okay. And now you're muted, so I can unmute you.
Yeah, I don't think I'm sharing my screen. It doesn't say I am.
Okay. Then I think you can just hop in and share your screen then, Leslie.
Okay, hold on. Let me see if this is okay, hold on.
It's usually at the is at the bottom. Yeah, I'm in Zoom like way more than I'd like to be, and I still don't know how to use it. Really.
Yeah, hold on. Okay. Let me see if this will work now. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool.
This would happen even not virtual.
Okay. So you guys,
nice.
Let's hit present and there we go. Okay, cool. Everyone see NYC Mesh Finance? Okay, awesome. So the past month or so, well, actually this started back in February. I had the idea of saying if we're a nonprofit, maybe we should go over our finances once a year just to see like how much money are we spending? How much money are we taking in? How are we running a deficit or whatnot? So I asked Josh, who's from ISOC, to give me kind of just a rundown of what's going on in our bank accounts. And he sent me a huge Google sheet from which I took some of the information and just put a few takeaways into the presentation I have here. So overall, 2019 wasn't a great year for Mesh. We ran a deficit for honestly most of the year. 9 out of the 12 months, we spent more money than we took in. Overall, we took in about $66,000 in revenue, and then after fees, we had about $60,000 to spend. Fees, so that number comes from the money we get from install fees, monthly donations, and one-off donations. And one-off donations and grants. So, and then in terms of fees, we get charged a fee for every donation that is made through Stripe. So that includes the install fees and the one-off fees. Those, the percentage that's taken can vary anywhere from 5 to 2% depending on the amount that's given, obviously, and it works on a sliding scale. So the more money that's donated, the smaller percentage of it that they take. ISOC, because we are underneath them, we're still underneath their organization. Our bank account is under ISOC, so they also take a 10% cut of all donations that come into for us. So just a quick breakdown as to where the money goes each month. So each month we have about $1,800 in recurring costs. That includes money for servers, data centers. We also pay for insurance on a quarterly basis, and we also pay for MailChimp, which I threw in as marketing fees. But on average, we spend about $5,350 a month on equipment. Obviously, it's been going up over 2019 because we're installing a lot more towards the end of the year than we were towards the beginning of the year. But you also see that in terms of the money that we take in. The amount of donations you'll see on another slide from the beginning of the year to the end of the year was greatly increased. Oh, no. There we go. So we saw a great deal of growth in 2019. The amount of donations we got in Q2 and Q3 of 2019 grew 23 and 35% in terms of the amount of money that was donated. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to offset the deficit that was occurring due to the new installs. And this, from what I understand, is due to the fact that before we were installing just light beam only, but we just started to add an Omni, which increased the cost of our installs. But unfortunately, what we were asking people to pay wasn't reflecting this new cost. So once we introduced a new $240 install fee in July, we started seeing the deficit each month decreasing. So for example, for the first half of 2019, we were running a deficit of probably $4,000 a month, give or take. And then towards the second half of 2019, that deficit starts to shrink to become more like $1,500 a month or $2,000 a month. So, and then I believe in December was the first month that I looked at that was actually kind of financially stable. If you look at this, we had a lot of growth in 2019, and I think that's due to the visibility that we had in the media. We had both articles in Vice and the Wall Street Journal that were pretty heavily covered that led to a great amount of interest in our services. So, and you can also see in the chart below that there was also a big uptick in donations in June and July. So what you see in this chart is the amount of donations that were given, not the money amount, but just the number of individual donations. Most of these donations are somewhere within the $20 to $50 range, with $20 being the most common denomination. So obviously, greater exposure in the media leads to greater donations. It makes sense. And that brings us to 2020. Actually, 2020 is actually looking really great for us. Even before COVID-19 hit, we were no longer running a deficit. We also had some grant money come in that was very helpful to us for stuff like the Install-a-thon video. And I think there was also money for the Install-a-thon that finally hit our bank account in the beginning of 2020. So that was definitely very helpful. And we're on average probably taking in about $500 more than we're spending, which is really good news for us. So what's going to happen now with coronavirus and the economy? We don't really know. We've paused our in-person installs for now, but there's a lot of interest in just bridging the digital divide. It's almost every day you see another article talking about how kids at home don't have reliable internet to do their homework on. And we're having a lot of interest come in from other groups. So I think right now would be a great time to look at grants specifically targeting these issues. I've seen some people post some things about these in the general chat, channel on our Slack, and I think also in the NYCHA outreach channel, or it could have been the outreach channel in general. But either way, there's a lot of opportunity that I think we could take advantage of now. And where are we right now? As of right now, we have about $9,500 in the bank, which is a great place for us. Installs are on hold, so we're obviously not buying equipment, and we're not really spending that money because other than our reoccurring monthly payments, which were about $1,800, we really our only other expenses were probably just pizza for our monthly meetings, which aren't happening right now, and the equipment we spent on for the install. So I think we should really consider using some of the money that we have in the bank account towards going, I see there's a question, towards doing some outreach work or partnering with someone else to see what can be done. And also in terms of what's happening with fiscal independence, the reason that we pay a 10% fee of what's in our bank account to ISOC every month or every year, but they take 10% of all donations that come in, is that the bank account is in their name, and that's because they have the nonprofit status which we are currently working towards. And me and Scott actually spoke with some ISOC people yesterday, and we're talking about how we can possibly use the money that they have been taking in fees from us to do a joint collaboration with them, something where it could have both the Mesh and the ISOC name on it. So even though we are currently moving towards becoming independent of them, I think we definitely want a collaborative relationship with them in the future. So for more information, I want to be posting updates every quarter just as a little reminder, this is how we're doing in the funding channel, so come check it out. There should be one more slide there should be one more slide that says questions, but oh, there we go. That's it. So if anyone wants questions, have at it.
Hey, I have a question. Thanks for this. Yeah, it's good to see that publicity does help with donations, because sometimes I get a little concerned that it just increases a bunch of people who just want to be added to the network and beyond our capacity. So it's good to see both. I was wondering, is maybe, and this is not like accusatory of your phone call with ISOC last night, but I was wondering if you know what, or if someone else maybe knows what they do spend our fees on, because they don't, I mean, ISOC New York chapter isn't all that active to my knowledge. So
yeah, they didn't really address it specifically as to what they spend it on, but we were trying to talk with them saying, hey, maybe we could use this money. Me and Scott specifically asked if we could use this money to apply towards NYCHA, because we're getting a lot of interest in NYCHA from NYCHA right now. So, but they want to make it something a little bit more collaborative, where it's not just they're cutting us a check. They want to be a little bit in on the action too.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and yeah, at the end of the day, is we agreed to pay this fee with them, so it's they can do what they want. But I was just curious because they're not, to my knowledge, they're not all that active.
Yeah, we really did. Yeah, I don't think they would say, oh yeah, we're taking your money and using it to buy routers for all our personal use or something like that. So yeah, they weren't very forthcoming with that.
Yeah, sure. I think
any other questions?
Brian Spencer Hall raised his hand.
Yeah, you're talking about spending the money on two things, outreach and something else. So the reason we don't spend on outreach is that demand's far in excess of what we can do already. So I think any outreach has to be really well focused. But did you have any other ideas for outreach?
Well, like I said, I think my main idea for outreach right now was mostly tied up in what's going on with NYCHA, because Scott has a lot of interest coming from NYCHA. They're talking about giving us roof space because they're having a huge issue right now with connectivity, and a lot of the children that live in NYCHA developments, and they're unable to do schoolwork, and when they're stuck at home for months on end, that's a huge issue, and they're very interested in bringing us in. But from my understanding, it's going to cost us money, and that's money that we may or may not be able to cover it in the full. So we were thinking of
that's more hardware money though.
Yeah, but I mean, in terms of outreach, I think another thing is, even if this NYCHA thing does go forward, we should put a little bit of effort into letting the residents of NYCHA know about it and kind of know who we are, because we are a community platform and we want to be involved with their community and bring them into our community.
So it sounds like you're suggesting maybe more targeted outreach, right? Not just general outreach, not like advertising, but more help this one group over here know more about us with whatever works for that group. Maybe a TEDs or flyers or something else or whatever, right?
Yes, because I think also right now that group is the one that's most in need. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Were you trying to set up a shop a few months ago on the website, or was that someone else? This
Me?
is like, yeah. Maybe it's-
No.
I don't know. I was just thinking outreach and I swag and
Yeah. Okay, anything else? Looks
I'm
like
shocked
no.
Olivia doesn't have any questions.
Olivia got a preview of the slides already before the meeting, so
Got it.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So since it's a small group, I think we could actually just do the regular breakout. So if you're new, you can break out. If you just like write in the chat, say that you want to go to like the new person mesh info breakout room, just like say me. And then if you want to keep the conversation going, I'll bring you into the breakout room. And then if you want, what?
Hey, Jillian, sorry, but maybe we don't even need to go to breakout rooms because,
Okay.
you know, more than maybe like 80% of the people here are existing meshers. And I think the second breakout we were going to have, there's only maybe 1 or 2 people who were going to attend it, I think. So maybe we should just stay here. It might save a lot of time and effort on your part.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, that works too. I was just going to do, I have a actual presentation on who we are, but I can kind of make it a bit more loose just to show people. And obviously, if you've been coming to our meetings month after month, this is going to be pretty redundant. So let me.
Maybe we can take a poll or something. It was just a suggestion because it might save a lot of time.
One thing is I could just break out with some new people if they have some questions, then you guys can keep the conversation going in here and then we can just jump back in. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was about to say I don't really think I should do like a what is NYC Mesh to most of the people here.
Sure.
Okay, so I will do the breakout room and you guys can continue and then we can hop back in. And that makes it a little less okay. Assign. Okay. Okay. Cool.
Which one gets recorded?
The main one. Do you want me to stop recording?
Oh, yeah.
That probably makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Let's stop.